Okay, before I get started, I'm full of colds, so I'll try and get through this without coughing and spluttering my way through. Can everybody hear me okay at the back? Bit closer, is that better? Okay. So, as has been said, I'm Adreena Parkin-Coates from the Building Safety Programme team within National Fire Chiefs Council. I've also been the chair of, I'm just working this out, there we go, of Working Group 5 for Fire Safety Officers. As a bit of a background, fire and rescue services in the UK already had a competency framework in place, which was published back in 2013. It covered competency standards for all fire safety officers, which included, therefore, all regulated premises under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. At the moment, fire and rescue services are not required or mandated to follow the competency framework. However, from research that I've undertaken over the past 12-15 months, it appears that most fire and rescue services have adopted the competency framework that's out there at the moment, in whole or in part. Fire and rescue services also benefit from existing national occupational standards for fire safety. They don't just cover fire and rescue services, they're also equally applicable to fire risk assessors and also to, say, fire wardens. So it's more of a wider sector national occupational standards than just solely sector specific. So looking at building a safer future, there were a number of issues that were raised with regard to fire safety officers and competency within Dame Judith's document. The first one was that the competency framework required review. So it was for 5 years old and it needed an update. So the work of the working group has been over the past 12 months to look at what was in there already and to refresh it and make sure that it's addressing all the key issues that we needed it to. Secondly, it was identified that those individuals or fire safety officers that were qualified or trained prior to the competency framework coming into being were not necessarily at the same standard of competency as those that had been qualified since the competency framework came out. We now have a very clear specification within the revised competency framework that everybody that was qualified or determined to be competent before the competency framework came out in 2013 now need to go through recognised prior learning so that we have a consistent level of competency across all fire safety officers. A further issue or a further comment that was made was that the competency framework, once revised, needed to be published as a standard through the Fire Standards Board. So the Fire Standards Board was set up over the past 12-18 months, essentially to create standards for various different roles and functions within fire and rescue services that fire and rescue services need to have regard to. They don't necessarily have to adopt the standard, however, they are measured against these standards when Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Service go into it and inspect them. So if they want a good or outstanding on their inspection report, it would be worth them taking note of the standard and working towards that. So the competency framework, it's under consultation at the moment. Once that's been completed and we've undergone comments resolution on that document, it will be forwarded to the Fire Standards Board to be issued as a standard. And lastly, there was a comment that fire safety officers should be accredited with a nationally recognised professional body. Within the new revised framework, it basically states that if you are a fire safety officer, you're going to be working on a building in scope, then you need to be registered with a nationally recognised professional body. It's likely that that will be the Institution of Fire Engineers, but that's out for consultation at the moment. And we will determine that in due course. That will have a reaccreditation attached to it, so every 2 or 3 years individuals will be reassessed, and as a matter of best practice it's also recommended that all fire safety officers should be registered with that nationally recognised professional body, so we have some independent scrutiny of competence for all fire safety officers. So whilst we were going through the existing competency framework, we realised that there were other items that we needed to address, one of which was looking at roles and responsibilities and making sure that they were clearly defined around the types of premises that people were regulating. So looking at what a simple, complex, specialist and fire engineered building might look like, and then being very clear about the qualifications and competencies associated with those individuals that were regulating those types of premises. So that's now sort of much clearly stated, I think, within the document. In addition, we recognise that actually fire and rescue services at the moment don't have a standard code of practice. It's likely that that will be issued as a standard by the Fire Standards Board in due course. However, in the interim, the Code of Conduct based upon the Competency Steering Group's principles of competence have been adopted and are included within the Competency Framework. Other issues we identified was around internal quality assurance, so working towards those competent organisations. So looking at actually who's undertaking that quality assurance of technical fire safety officers' work and making sure that those individuals are technically competent themselves, so that we're making sure that we have robust, consistent enforcement. In addition, we've also highlighted that enhanced knowledge may be required for certain specialist premises, such as hospitals, transport infrastructure, sports stadia. So again, that's highlighted as something that fire and rescue services need to consider for our individual fire safety officers. And likewise, continuous professional development has been clearly specified following the guidelines for the Institution of Fire Engineers. So what are those barriers to delivery? So we have over the past, sorry, I'm looking down here and I'm being told to stop. Okay, so a number of barriers to delivery. We have limited budgets that may have, the introduction of the competency framework may have cost implications. We've stated that fire and rescue services should have fire engineers available to all fire safety officers. Again, cost implications there. We know that the IFE, if it becomes our professional body, may have issues with delivering through capacity issues, and also that there's also no incentive for fire safety officers to undertake registration with the professional body. It costs money, therefore if it doesn't form part of the individual's contract, or the fire and rescue service doesn't pay for that, then again that may cause issues in terms of bringing fire safety officers into that realm. And national occupational standards, we know, need to be revised. We have undertaken that work. Those are again out for consultation. We will need to go through the process of making sure that all our training providers are undertaking the work in terms of making sure that they are working towards those revised standards to deliver appropriate knowledge and performance standards for our officers. So in terms of delivery, the consultation, as I've said, is open at the moment, both the competency framework and the revised national occupational standards. The closing date I've got here is 31st of October. It isn't actually, it is the 18th of October for our consultation. No, for raising the bar it is, but for my competency framework for fire safety officers it's 18th of October. So we would anticipate that we will be getting the competency framework to the Fire Standards Board by the end of the year. Sorry, that feels like it's been a very, very quick whistle-stop tour. I look forward to your questions shortly.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me at the back? Good. No hecklers, please. So, yeah, thank you for that introduction, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. We're almost there. Would help if I move the slides along. So, I am Building Control Manager at Manchester City Council. I'm also Chair for the Working Group 6, which is the Building Standards Professionals. Probably easier to be referred to as building control inspectors or building standards inspectors. So what is Working Group 6, or more importantly, who's involved? So behind me you can see the slide of all those participants that were involved in Working Group 6. Apologies to MHCLG who are here today, they were part of that group as well, so it's nice to see them here today, and my apologies to Lindsay. So we've been tasked, like everybody else, to come up with a set of competencies for building control standards professionals. And for this, the group comprises those within both the profession and industry who might all be involved with building standards inspection, and all the organisations you see behind me will have been members who are either directly involved in compliance inspection or who work closely with building standards inspectors, for instance the fire authorities. And we also had members who actually sat on other working groups as well, so we could get an overview of what everybody else was doing and what we could have a bit of input into the other working groups also. So we believe we had sufficient expertise around the table to consider both the current systems of competence and also establish what good might look like in the future. Within those organisations, we also had a sprinkle of industry insight from those practitioners working at the coalface in compliance inspection, in design and in construction. And I'd just like to thank everybody that took part in that working group. It was a sterling piece of work from everybody. And it's nice to see some of the working group are here today to support this initiative. So, who are building standards professionals? In our report, we've given some detailed insight into the work, the role of building standards professionals, but in summary, individuals, generally speaking, will be working in the building control sector, be employed either in the public sector in a local authority or within a consultancy as an approved inspector. We'll be assessing building plans and specifications and carrying out inspections of work in progress on building sites to determine compliance with building regulations, and that will involve new build, it will involve alterations, renovations, change of use, right up to life cycle end, which will be demolition. The purposes of in-scope buildings, or HRBs, will be should be educated to degree level in a construction, surveying or engineering related subject, and many will be members of a professional institute or institutions, quite a few are members of more than one, such as CABE, ABE, CIOB and RICS being the ones most common to the building standards sector. So, as you've already heard in the early sessions, since the Grenfell tragedy, there have been questions raised about do those working in in-scope buildings have the necessary tools, the knowledge, the understanding, the skill and the experience to be able to safely deliver such projects. Building control has equally not been immune from such questions. But we're all qualified. We all have letters after our names, and we've all been doing this job for donkey's years. We know what we're doing, do we? Can we prove it? How do we prove it to those who we are trying to make safe? A test or an exam that was taken 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago, is that sufficient? Will that test together with CPD alone be enough, especially if it relates to 30 hours of reading a journal or going to the odd product seminar? Probably not. So there needs to be demonstrable evidence of competence so that it can be seen, so that it can show that we are making the right decisions about safety compliance, and that by having met a level of competence which is to an agreed national standard is consistently applied across the whole of the sector, and which is a transparent and continuous process. So our recommendations. Our report and framework, which can be considered as a blueprint, has been through a number of iterations. We began by considering something just for HRBs, but the group soon decided that non-HRB residents might feel rightly aggrieved if they too didn't have some similar competence inspector looking at their project. Indeed, only recently there have been numerous, it's already been mentioned in the earlier presentations, media articles about non-HRB compliance concerns. So our group looked at expanding the scheme beyond HRB, but with the time involved it became clear we had too tight a deadline to do that. So we chose to develop a format that we felt would be appropriate for HRBs and which might be relatively easily to adopt in the future, or adapt in the future, for developing frameworks for those building standards professionals who might not be qualified to HRB standards. From our deliberations, which included a review of the competencies the main professional bodies delivered for membership purposes as well as those employed by some businesses, we arrived at the style and format contained in the report, a style that is used across the industry. So without going into too much detail, and no doubt you've all read the report whilst you've been sipping a cocoa tonight or last night, we believe that the points behind me are fundamentally necessary to ensure that our competence can be consistent, transparent and measurable, and in being so, these will be, we believe, offer the following benefits. Speaks for itself, the ultimate goal. framework goes into a little bit more detail, but these are a short summary. And on the last one is translates to employability. 3 seconds. Benefits the organisations, again a summary of the narrative within our suggested framework. Benefits to industry. Businesses want to be reassured just as much as residents and employers. Challenges. Even if the framework was to be agreed tomorrow, it will take time to roll out. It will also depend on other factors such as the role of the building safety regulator. We should be conscious that costs to train and accredit inspectors will have to be funded and continually funded. This could impact on the cost to deliver new HRBs in the future, but mustn't be seen as an obstacle to change. There will need to be organisations in place to deliver the training and certification for competence inspectors, as indeed there will be for any other construction professional. We've ventured part way along the journey and we're yet to get to our destination, but we're getting closer. But there remain things to be done and we're committed to seeing this through. So we do need your feedback on the proposals to assess if we're on the right lines. Once we have the feedback, we can review and make any changes thought necessary. We also need to look at how and who will deliver the competencies and for certifying competence. When we have these resolved together with an agreed common standard of competence to work from, we can begin rolling the scheme out to the sector. Thank you.
Mike Foy representing CIOB, and it's to Wayne. Wayne, in terms of approved inspectors, do you see any additional issues or challenges in implementing your recommendations or not?
No. In terms of competence, we can roll this out to the whole of the sector. As I said in the presentation, most of the building control professionals that work in the industry at the moment are trained to degree level. Most have gone through a competency assessment process through the professional bodies. What we haven't done is we haven't rolled that out as a continual, frequent exercise, which is what we will be endeavouring to do. So we've heard about, is it going to be 2 years, is it going to be 5 years? Our view was that we should have it over a 5-year period as a peer review. Every 2 years, maybe have an interim review, or have it within the workplace whereby you collate the information through CPD and appraisal processes to then to inform the peer review once every 5 years. So it's a continuous process.
Hi, it's to Adreena. Adreena, how far away do you think we are from having one enforcement team for the whole of England, Wales?
I don't know that that's necessarily on the cards, to be honest. I mean, I think we have various sort of elements in place now. Obviously, National Fire Chiefs Council can't mandate fire and rescue services to follow direction from themselves, but we've got the Protection Board in place now. HMIC FRS will be providing consistency across fire and rescue services. So I don't see at the moment, I could be wrong, but I don't see that there will be a single fire and rescue service protection element outside of individual fire and rescue services. Was that your question?
More on the enforcement teams that are going out doing the enforcement, because on the enforcement teams themselves, there's inconsistency from London, for example, and Hertfordshire. And I know that the primary authority was supposed to sort of address some of that, but it really hasn't.
Yes, I mean, I think this comes down to making sure that we've got a robust competency framework, that the training providers are providing consistent training for fire and rescue services, and that we are doing that joined up work around making sure that fire and rescue services are talking sufficiently to each other to make sure that they are adopting best practice. So we do have those elements that we've introduced through NFCC to try and support that. We're possibly not there yet, but obviously, you know, we're working towards it, and primary authority, as you've mentioned, is one of the other mechanisms that we can use in order to be able to assist large businesses that have businesses or buildings across fire and rescue service boundaries.
Hi, Dave Stevenson, Notts Fire and Rescue. I'm relatively new to this role, so if it's a stupid question, please forgive me. It's a question for you, if I may. Does it look like we're going to specialist roles then, when we talk about inspectors, fire safety inspectors going out to high-risk buildings, and then you talked about hospitals as well. Are we going to end up with a load of specialist roles within the fire protection teams?
So I think it's important that fire and rescue services and protection departments consider what knowledge requirements are necessary for different types of premises, and that's again very clearly stated within the document. So I think I mentioned specialist premises for hospitals, sports stadium, etc., and there's quite a long list of those. I think it's unrealistic to expect a fire safety officer who is trained to a level 4 diploma in fire safety to not be provided with additional training for certain ones of those. For example, thinking about all the HCM series of documents and technical guidance for hospitals, you would need to have a background knowledge in that. So it's raising awareness out there that the organisation needs to make sure that their fire safety officers are competent to undertake the roles that they're being asked to do. But no, I don't see it as lots of specialisms. I would say you would have a broad group of individuals, but you will train in certain ones to be able to go and do those particular functions.